Welcome back from the break, guys.
Now, today's feature is going to be about asylum seekers. A few weeks back, there was a fire in the Villawood Detention Centre and there were some people protesting on the roofs. And with that, the whole discussion of asylum seekers was back in the spotlight, although it never really leaves it. I mean, it's always a topic of discussion, right, Tasnim?
Definitely, and I think that what was contentious at that time, as we did mention on the show, was the suicides that had happened at Curtin and also at other detention centres with people,
not able to handle the enormous waiting times and the rejections of their applications.
Definitely. So what we thought at the Yfactor was, we wanted to get like a personal feel as to this topic. Why is it such it's a very sticky topic, and it seems every time there's like some political unrest or there's an election coming up or something, the first thing that comes up is this issue of asylum seekers.
And seeing as we currently have a hung parliament and Labor, Liberal, the Greens and everyone sort of squabbling over what issues they want to make important, the topic of opening up detention centres offshore out of Australia is also currently under scrutiny. So, for example, they were proposing a Papua New Guinea detention centre. And it's very interesting to see because you were telling me that the federal budget's actually specified a huge amount of money towards Papua New Guinea.
Well, definitely the federal budget, as it did come out, has allocated an extra $500 million on foreign aid, right? And most of this money is going to Pacific Islander nations, specifically Papua New Guinea. Now, Anthony Lewinstein and some others have said, is this like a modern form of colonialism, right? Or even you can even categorize it as some sort of blackmail. We give you aid and you have to accept our asylum seekers to be processed. Now, this comes with the news of Malaysia. There were similar proposals in Malaysia and also East Timor.
I think they gave up on East Timor and now they've set their sights on Malaysia. But there's reports coming out that refugees in Malaysia aren't really treated very humanely.
Definitely.
So human rights groups and people who are actually worried about refugees and their status.
They're not even signatory to the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of a Refugee.
Really?
So if a country is not a signatory, what do you expect them to do? What conditions do they abide by?
I find it really interesting that you made reference to colonialism. It actually reminds me of this tweet that was on ABC Q&A the other day, and basically Mike Fitzsimon was saying, my Aboriginal mate still defines irony as one wave of boat people complaining about another. So, I mean, maybe Australia needs to have another look at the definition of a boat person and whether we should really be against them to this extent.
Definitely, and I think the debate is very interesting in terms of that the stigmatization is always attached to boat people, right? Now, there was an article in Crikey by
Bernard Keane,
and he was actually saying that the majority of asylum seekers last year were actually from China, and they actually arrived by airplanes, not by boats, okay? And these were illegal immigrants and things like that.
Yeah, we actually found that when we went to Villawood Detention Centre ourselves. They have the whole area is split into three. You've got stage 1, which is people detained for causing problems and, like, for example, they're here on a valid visa, but they've dealt in drugs or something. So they put them into the stage 1 section of Villawood. And then you have stage 2 people who actually came by airplane.
That's right. And overstayed their visas or had some trouble, yeah.
And then, of course, there's the boat people who are in stage 3. But interestingly enough, only 1/3 of the people in the detention centre are from, our boat people.
Well, that's the stigma attached to them, We think Australia's shores, and this is much of the political rhetoric out there that, we're being swamped, we need national security, we need border security. And it just feels like, honestly, these asylum seekers are, swimming in through the oceans and they're coming to choke Australia with their presence. When the reality, it's nothing like that. Now, as you mentioned earlier, just to make it clear for our audience, me and Miran did go to Villawood Detention Centre last week just to kind of get a feel of what it's like to be in the detention centre and get to speak to some of the detainees.
It was quite the experience. I mean, we went into there not really knowing what to expect. We just had, the typical images you get from the news and stuff.
Not just that, like driving up before we even got to the place, right? You drive up, this is Villawood, so you've got, AMF bowling on the one side and you've got the highway, and then out of the blue there's this like obscure bush, and then you enter and then it says detention centre. And from that moment, no photography, nothing. You walk, you have to park your car, you walk in.
And there's all these security checkpoints.
That's
inside.
right. That's right. So you have to get in, you need to fill out a form and you need to actually know someone in there.
Yeah. And then they kind of write on your arm in invisible
ink. That's right. So when you're leaving, it's not you that leaves. And it was really interesting because the day we went, that the riots had happened last week. So they couldn't actually call the person we wanted to see through the
speaker system like they normally do. We actually had to use mobile phones to contact the refugees inside. The actual fire itself was to the detriment of the refugees within there, I would say, because they burnt down the gym, they burnt down
the prayer area,
one of the prayer rooms that they have, and plenty of the billiards room, the entire computer room. So they used to pass a lot of time just by sitting on the internet and reading news and you know, just catching up with family overseas and stuff. Now that all of this has been burnt down, they really have nothing to do. They sit there cooped up all day doing nothing.
And what they were saying is while the fires were going on, they actually all had to sleep on the lawn, and they were showing us, they're like, this is the lawn we had to sleep in. And it was
basically the visiting area that we were in.
That's right. And it was probably like 20 by 30 meters, right? And he's like, up to 100 people were sleeping outside on like sleeping bags and stuff. And I remember it was actually like raining profusely like 2-3 days before that.
Yeah, they told us they were sleeping out. We asked them, even though it was raining, and they said, yeah, we were sleeping on the wet floor.
That's right. So, you know, on the media, it seemed like, oh, you know, these rebels taking hold of the detention centre. The people that, you know, they were the ones affected, not everybody else, not the guards and things like that. I think, Miran, what was really shocking for me was the actual feel of the detention centre. It really felt like a prison. Yeah. And you had these people that are in limbo, have their whole life on limbo, waiting for something to happen.
Mind you, we didn't go inside the buildings. The visiting area is actually an outside space. But just sitting there and seeing massive barbed wire fences around you from every direction in itself just makes you feel, you know, choked, like you have no liberty basically. And they live for every visit that they get. It's the only relief that they get, you know, news from the outside world, just seeing someone, even if they don't know you. I mean, the refugees we went in and saw, we'd never met them before, but they were just so happy to, you know, meet someone and talk to us. And they were so generous. They full made us tea and they offered us, you know, like chocolate and biscuits that, you know, we had actually brought with us because it's not something that's really available to them on the inside.
That's right. I think the interesting thing was basically these people, each one has a story. Now, we were speaking to one of the detainees there. He was around 24 years old and he was from an Iraqi background, right? So we go, you know, what's your story? And he started speaking to us and he was telling us he's actually been in a refugee camp since the time he was 6. He went from Iraq to Iran to Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and then he ended up going to Indonesia. From Indonesia came to Australia. In Australia has been transferred 3-4 times from Curtin.
Xmas Island to Curtin to Villawood Detention Centre.
That's right. And this guy's 24 years old, right? Imagine spending literally 3/4 of your life as a prisoner, although you're not really a prisoner. And we were just like, how do you do it, you know? And he was just, you know, like...
yeah, because you look at them and I guess I was going in there expecting that I would have to be really, really touchy because they're probably all depressed and emo and stuff. But they really put on a brave face.
Definitely. And one of the other detainees we spoke to, we go to him, what's your view on these people, you know, causing the riots, you know, burning things down, committing suicide? And honestly, what he said shook me because he goes, they're giving us animal conditions. They want to treat us like animals. We will not stoop to such a level. He didn't agree with any of the violence. He didn't agree to the suicide. He goes, we have values and we have principles in life, and we'll never compromise them, even regardless of the conditions you put us in. And I think, you know,
he was Muslim, the guy we were speaking to, and he was telling us that, oh no, it's because of my Islam that I would not actually go ahead and do this. So it's nice that they managed to hang on to their faith,
to their values. And you know what, I'd probably lose hope in humanity if I had to spend that much time, you know, in a detention centre and things. But
you know, there's also the stuff that doesn't come out in the media. Like that week, right, there were the people on the roof. The day we went to visit them in the detention centre, they'd finally just gotten everyone off the roof the day before. Now, during that protest, one of the people was epileptic, and so he had to come down early, and so did another. One of the guys who came down before the rest, instead of beating him up and punishing him, the guards actually let other refugees do their dirty work for them. So what they did, according to the refugees that we spoke to, was they took this guy who'd been protesting on the roof and they put him in a room with islander refugees, okay? And they took away all the privileges of those islanders, no visits, no, you know, computers, no TV, nothing. And they said to them that it's his fault that you've been stripped of your privileges. Now, it's hardly surprising that the minute they left, the guy got beaten up. They broke his nose, his mouth was smashed, he looked like a bloody pulp, basically, by the end of it. And yeah, that's justice in the refugee centre.
Not just that, I think when we were there, when one of the case officers would walk past or whatever, they would kind of have labels for them because they knew exactly how each one dealt. Now, I know they have standards, they have, professional, legal, and, basically that's their job. But at the same time, the way they treat these refugees is really horrible because some of the detainees were saying basically utter lack of respect, treating them...
They get looked down upon.
Not just looked down upon, but also like manhandled, treated in like really horrific ways as if like, why are you doing this? You're a criminal and things like that.
They did say that they were like, some of the guards were fine, and I went into that detention centre prepared to hate the people working there because, they're cooping up those innocent people inside. But they were just so friendly outside, it's practically just an outside company operating the detention centre. It's not their fault that Australia has this terrible policy when it comes to refugees. Well, it's interesting
you mentioned that because Circa, which is actually a multinational organisation that operates prisons and the like, was featured on Lateline last week in relation to this matter, and they had an anonymous guard who actually whistle blew in regards to the conditions that occur in this detention centre. Now, he was saying that basically you want to go in there, you want to change the world, you want to, do correct things, but the conditions are actually really adverse, and it's having an effect not just on the detainees but on the people there. And he was saying they're not provided with counselling services and they just feel really, really inadequate, and basically they're actually very, very understaffed. Now, in February, when the riot actually did break up, they had 15 guards only to monitor 2,500 detainees. Now, you can tell that it's, a lose-lose situation with this.
Well, it's like we mentioned earlier in the segment, there's so much that happens behind closed doors with the refugee centres. Like, for example, one of the things that they used to do is provide them with English classes. So, first of all, it passes the time. Secondly, if their applications do get accepted when they get out into Australian society, they can speak English and function. They don't do that anymore. They don't take them on excursions out of the detention centre anymore either. Now, the good thing, at least, that I could figure out was there weren't any children at all in the Villawood Detention Centre, and there weren't very many women. On Xmas Island, that's a completely different story. Now, what we asked the refugees there was, you guys, you're in contact with your family overseas, and you know people who end up coming here by boat as well. You're in this situation where you're hating your life in a refugee centre. Why wouldn't you tell them not to do the same thing, not to get on a boat? And they said, yes, we do. When they call us and ask for advice, should we come to Australia, whatever, we tell them, don't do it. It's not worth it. Look, I'm locked up in a prison, basically. But the thing is, these people, when they get on that boat, they're just in such a desperate mode. They have no other choice, they feel, and they don't really believe it until they see it. And when they get here, they just sort of call up the guys at Villawood and say, what were you thinking?
I think, too, in relation to what you're saying, 2 points stood out for me when we were there. The first one was when I actually go to the guy, but why'd you get on a boat? And he kind of looked at me in a really are you for real? Like, do you think if I had the luxuries that you have, I would choose to risk my life, get on a boat, nearly drown, leave my family behind just to come here and for you to ask me this question? And the second issue was, it was really interesting because he was saying some of the refugees actually attempt to run away from Australia back to Malaysia.
Indonesia.
Indonesia.
Malaysia. But yes, actually, they said, they were sitting there telling us, Indonesians are the best people in terms of treatment. They didn't look down on us. They catered for us in every way. They were so kind to us. This doesn't happen in Australia. And for this reason, like you're saying, many people try to find any way to escape the refugee centres in order to get back on a boat to go back to Indonesia. But another thing that was quite ironic is, with the Iraqi refugees that we spoke to, they would say that some of them get rejected by the case officers who tell them, UN reports say that Iraq is now safe after Saddam Hussein has been executed. And it's really interesting because most of these people got on the boat after the execution and they're telling you Iraq is not safe. We were in danger on a daily basis. We're trying to get out of here and get accepted so we can bring our families who are also in danger over there.
Definitely.
So it's quite you get the two different sides here with the UN report saying one thing and then the decisions. And
well, what was actually really interesting was how politically and legally savvy these individuals were, right?
Oh gosh, now we've news junkies.
Not just that, but legally. I know I work at an immigration centre, right? And they had all this information that I never knew, and I work on these cases. And he was saying basically, you know, this is the political situation at the moment. Next week, this is going to happen.
And they were telling us, they were pointing out the flaws and the benefits of the Gillard government as opposed to the Rudd government. It was really interesting. They were all like, no, we loved Kevin Rudd. You know, he was amazing. We're not too fond of the policies that Julia Gillard has put into place. And they mentioned that Sarah Hanson-Young, the Greens MP politician, had come down to visit them at Villawood Detention Centre, and they said they felt hopeful when she came, but then when she left, you know, nothing really ended up changing for them. So they actually knew so much more about what was happening in Australia and the laws and the politics and everything, way more than I reckon the average layperson would know.
Definitely. And I think that's why they were like, look, we're here, let us go. And, you know, we'll get out there, we'll work, we'll do whatever. Like, we're not here to, you know, rot the system or blah. You know, they actually genuinely are seeking a better life. And I think that's the sentiment that most of them wanted to convey to the people out there. Like, we are human, you know, we just fled these conditions and we're just here for a better life, trying to start a new future.
You know, Tasnim, one of the saddest things that they said to us was that to pass time in the refugee centre, they sit there guessing every person who walks out from their interview with their case officer, whether they've been rejected or not. And they take bets on it, basically, you know, whether this person's going to get their visa or not.
And they've become experts. They're like, exactly. Oh, you can tell by the demeanour, the way they walk and all this stuff. Now, I know it sounds a bit funny, but it's actually really, really tragic. Imagine that's right. This is what they've been reduced to. And again, you know, the waiting times, you had people there that we met that have been transferred from centre to centre. They've been there for years waiting for an outcome. And the other fascinating thing was, not fascinating, but the other horrible thing was, they would actually, some of them be granted a visa, right? So they're like, okay, you're a genuine refugee, you're granted a visa. But then the security checks and all the other things would take another couple of months.
One guy was in there for 1 year and 2 months after he got granted his visa. He's still there now waiting for his security clearance to be finished.
Well, to give you more insight on this matter, we actually spoke to someone who actually went down to the detention centre to volunteer.
In Xmas Island.
So let's just listen to what he has to say.